Hey there, welcome. Get yourself comfortable however you like to settle in, for sleep is perfect. Maybe adjust your pillow, find that sweet spot where everything feels just right. Tonight, we're going on a gentle journey back to ancient Greece, and I'm going to share 100 fascinating facts with you. But here's the thing, you don't need to remember a single one. You don't need to pay close attention. This is just company as you drift off. Think of it like I'm here, keeping you company while your mind slowly lets go of the day. If you fall asleep after fact number 3, perfect. If you hear all 100, that's wonderful too. There's no test, no quiz, just interesting stories from a civilization that existed over 2,500 years ago. So take a nice deep breath in and let it out slowly. Let your body sink into wherever you're lying. And let's begin with something I find absolutely fascinating. Fact 1, the painted statues. You know those beautiful white marble statues we see in museums? The ones that look so elegant and timeless? Well, here's something that might surprise you: they weren't white at all. Not originally. The ancient Greeks painted their statues in bright, vibrant colors. We're talking reds, blues, yellows, greens, really bold shades. They'd paint the hair, the clothing, the eyes, even the skin tones. If you could time travel back to ancient Athens and walk through a temple, you'd see statues that looked almost cartoonishly colorful to our modern eyes. Over centuries, the paint just wore away, weathered by rain, sun, and time. By the time people started finding these statues during the Renaissance, they were bare white marble, and everyone thought, oh, how refined and classical. But that wasn't the look the Greeks were going for at all. They liked color. Lots of it. It's funny how our idea of classical elegance is actually just age and erosion, you know? Fact 2, the garlic fertility test. Alright, this one's pretty interesting. Ancient Greek physicians had a fertility test, and it involved garlic. Yes, garlic. Here's how it worked: a woman would insert a clove of garlic overnight. In the morning, if her breath smelled like garlic, that meant she was fertile. Her body had an open pathway, ready for conception. If her breath didn't smell like garlic, it suggested her body might be blocked or she was already pregnant. The theory was that a woman's body had a kind of passage running through it, and the garlic smell traveling from one end to the other showed everything was working properly. Now, we know this isn't scientifically accurate, but you have to appreciate the observational thinking, right? They were trying to understand their bodies with the knowledge they had. And honestly, at least they were trying to figure these things out systematically. That counts for something. Fact 3, Olympic athletes and nudity. So here's one you might have heard about: Olympic athletes competed completely naked. And I mean completely. No clothes at all. But here's the part that's really interesting: this wasn't about being casual or relaxed. It was deeply meaningful. The word gymnasium actually comes from the Greek word gymnos, which means naked. When they exercised nude, they were celebrating the human body as something divine, something worth honoring. There's actually a story about how this tradition started. Legend says that during a race, a runner's loincloth fell off, and he ran faster without it and won. After that, athletes decided to compete nude. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But it makes a good story. Women weren't allowed to watch the games, by the way, with one exception: the priestess of Demeter got a special seat of honor. Just one woman in a stadium of thousands of men. Wild to think about. Fact 4, wine and water. Here's something I love: the ancient Greeks thought drinking undiluted wine was barbaric. Absolutely barbaric. They would always mix their wine with water, usually 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes even more water than that. Drinking wine straight was something only uncivilized people did, in their view. It was crude, excessive, almost offensive. They had these special vessels called craters, which were big bowls specifically for mixing wine and water. At dinner parties, symposiums, they called them, there was a whole ceremony around it. The host would decide the ratio, and everyone would drink the same mixture. It was about moderation, civilization, social harmony. Imagine going to a party where the host is like, tonight we're doing 4 parts water, 1 part wine, and everyone's like, ooh, refined. Different times, right? Fact 5. Spartan women's freedom. Okay, so we often hear about how restricted women were in ancient Greece, and in Athens, that was largely true. But Spartan women? Completely different story. Spartan women could own property, run estates, and manage businesses. When their husbands were away at war, which was often, women ran everything. They were educated, they exercised publicly, they had a say in family decisions. They were even known for being outspoken and witty. There's this famous story about a foreign woman who said to a Spartan woman, "You Spartan women are the only ones who rule over your men." And the Spartan woman replied, "That's because we're the only ones who give birth to real men." Savage, right? They didn't mess around. Fact 6. The yo-yo. You know what toy ancient Greek children played with? The yo-yo. Archaeologists have found ancient yo-yos made from wood, metal, and terracotta. They're some of the oldest toys ever discovered. Kids would paint them, decorate them, compete with them just like kids do today. There's something really sweet about that, don't you think? A child 2,500 years ago, sitting in the sun, playing with a yo-yo, probably getting in trouble for playing with it during lessons. Same stuff kids do now. Human nature doesn't change that much, really. The technology changes, the clothes change, but kids? Kids are just kids. Fact 7. Beards as status symbols. In ancient Greece, beards were serious business. A full, well-groomed beard was a sign of wisdom, masculinity, and status. Philosophers were especially known for their beards. Young men would wait eagerly for their beards to come, and it was like a rite of passage. When a young man's beard started growing, it meant he was becoming a citizen, a full member of society. Alexander the Great actually changed this tradition. He encouraged his soldiers to shave because in battle, enemies could grab you by the beard. After Alexander, beards went out of fashion for a while. But for most of Greek history, a good beard was essential. Plato had a beard. Socrates had a beard. Aristotle had a beard. If you wanted to be taken seriously as a thinker, you needed a beard. It was practically a job requirement. Fact 8. The honey and pepper mix. Athletes in ancient Greece had their version of performance enhancers, and it's not what you'd expect. Honey mixed with pepper. They believed this combination gave them extra strength and stamina. Before competitions, athletes would consume honey mixed with ground pepper, convinced it would give them an edge. Now, honey does provide quick energy, that part makes sense. But the pepper? That was more about the theory that hot foods created internal heat and energy. There were all sorts of other foods athletes ate too: figs for strength, cheese for muscle, dried fruits for endurance. They were trying to optimize performance, just like athletes do now. They just had different ideas about what worked. And honestly, the placebo effect is real. If they believed it helped, it might have actually helped. Mind over matter and all that. Fact 9. The ban on beans. Here's a weird one. The philosopher Pythagoras, the triangle guy, he and his followers refused to eat beans. Absolutely would not touch them. Why? Well, Pythagoras believed in reincarnation, and he thought that beans contained the souls of the dead. He said that beans and humans were created from the same source material. His evidence? If you chew a bean and leave it in the sun, it starts to smell like human remains. There's even a legend that Pythagoras died because he refused to run through a bean field to escape his enemies. He'd rather face death than trample beans. Now, that's probably not true, but the fact that people believed it shows how seriously they took this bean thing. Ancient philosophy could get pretty strange sometimes. Fact 10. Hair dye and curling. Greek women were big on beauty treatments, and blonde hair was all the rage. Even though most Greeks had dark hair naturally, blonde was considered the ideal. So women would bleach their hair using a mixture that included potash, which is basically wood ash, and sometimes yellow flower petals. They'd sit in the sun for hours letting it lighten. Or they'd wear wigs made from blonde hair imported from the north. And curling? Oh yes. They had curling irons heated over fires. Women would wrap their hair around these hot metal rods to create curls. Beauty took time and effort, just like it does now. Men styled their hair too. Younger men often wore it long and curled. It wasn't just about vanity, it was about presenting yourself well in society. Still here with you, still plenty more to discover, but only if you're awake for it. Fact 11. The Olympic Truce. Here's something beautiful. During the Olympic Games, all wars stopped. It was called the Ekakyria, the Olympic Truce. For the duration of the Games and the travel time before and after, all conflicts ceased. Athletes, spectators, and officials could travel to Olympia safely, even through enemy territory. This wasn't just a nice idea, it was taken seriously. If a city-state violated the truce, they'd be fined heavily and banned from future games. The games were more important than war. Can you imagine that? Every 4 years, the entire Greek world would just pause. Stop fighting. Come together. Compete in sports instead of battle. For a few weeks, they remembered they were all Greek, all human, all part of something bigger. We could use something like that now, couldn't we? Fact 12. Theater masks. In Greek theater, all the actors wore masks. These weren't small, subtle masks, they were large, exaggerated, with big features that could be seen from the back rows of huge amphitheaters. But here's the clever part, the masks also functioned as megaphones. The mouth opening was designed to amplify the actor's voice, helping it carry across the theater. Form and function, all in one. Since all actors were men, they'd use masks to play women, old people, young people, gods, mortals, all different characters. They'd switch masks between scenes to play multiple roles. The audience would recognize characters instantly by their masks. And in comedies, the masks were hilarious: huge noses, ridiculous expressions, wild hair. In tragedies, they were more dignified, more solemn. The mask set the tone before a word was even spoken. Fact 13. The Agora Experience. The Agora wasn't just a marketplace, it was the heart of city life. Imagine a big open square with covered walkways, shops, stalls, temples, government buildings, all buzzing with activity. In the morning, men would head to the Agora to shop, sure, but also to catch up on news, discuss politics, meet friends, debate philosophy. It was like a combination of a shopping mall, a town hall, and a social media feed all rolled into one physical space. Women would send slaves or servants to do most shopping, but they'd sometimes go themselves, especially to buy fabric or jewelry. Street vendors would call out about their goods: fresh fish, olive oil, pottery, leather, sandals. The smell of food cooking, the sound of metalworkers hammering, the chatter of hundreds of conversations. It must have been overwhelming and wonderful all at once. Fact 14. Democracy in action. Athens invented democracy, but it looked very different from ours. For one thing, it was direct democracy. Citizens voted on everything themselves. No representatives. But here's the catch: only free adult males born in Athens were citizens. No women, no slaves, no foreigners. So out of a population of maybe 300,000 people, only about 30,000 could vote. That's about 10%. They gather on a hill called the Nix for assemblies. Any citizen could speak, could propose a law. They'd vote by raising hands. For important decisions, they needed at least 6,000 citizens present. They also had this practice called ostracism. Once a year, they could vote to exile someone for 10 years, no trial, no charges, just "we think you're getting too powerful, so leave." You'd write a name on a pottery shard in ostracan, and if someone got enough votes, they had to go. Democracy, but make it ancient. Fact 15. Wedding customs. Greek weddings were 3-day affairs, full of rituals and symbolism. The bride would typically be around 13 to 15 years old, which is hard for us to think about now. The groom would be in his late 20s or 30s. Before the wedding, the bride would sacrifice her childhood toys to the gods, a ritual goodbye to girlhood. The night before, she'd take a special bath in water carried from a sacred spring. On the wedding day, there'd be a feast at the bride's father's house. Then, as night fell, the groom would carry the bride to his home in a torchlit procession. Family and friends would follow, singing and celebrating. The bride's mother would carry a torch lit from her own hearth, symbolizing the transfer of the bride from one household to another. It was both joyous and melancholy, a celebration and a loss, all at once. Fact 16. Toilet arrangements. Okay, so we talked about the cleaning materials earlier, but let's talk about the actual toilets themselves. Public latrines were pretty advanced, actually. They had rows of seats, no partitions between them, just stone or wooden benches with holes cut out. Underneath, there'd be a channel of running water that would wash waste away. Very communal. Very not private. Men would sit there, side by side, doing their business and chatting about politics or philosophy or the latest chariot race. It was social time. Romans later adopted the same system. At home, wealthier Greeks might have chamber pots, which slaves would empty. Less wealthy people might use public latrines or simply find a spot outside the city. They did have one smart innovation: the running water under the toilets also kept the smell down somewhat. Not perfect, but better than nothing. Fact 17. The Oracle at Delphi. People traveled from all over the Greek world to consult the oracle at Delphi. The Pythia, the priestess who channeled Apollo's prophecies, was the most powerful woman in Greece in a way. Kings and generals sought her advice. Here's how it worked: you'd arrive, pay a fee, maybe sacrifice an animal. Then you'd submit your question. The Pythia would sit on a tripod over a crack in the earth, where vapors supposedly rose up. She'd go into a trance and deliver Apollo's message. But here's the thing: her prophecies were famously ambiguous. If you go to war, a great empire will fall, but which empire? Yours or theirs? People would interpret the prophecies to fit what they wanted to believe. Modern archaeologists actually found evidence of ethylene gas seeping from cracks in the rocks there. So maybe those vapors were real, and she really was getting lightheaded and experiencing altered states. Or maybe it was all theater. We'll never know for sure. Either way, people believed. And belief is powerful. Fact 18, Dinner Party Philosophy. Symposiums were dinner parties, but they were also where some of the most important philosophical discussions happened. After the meal, men would recline on couches, drink wine, and talk about politics, ethics, love, the nature of reality. Plato's most famous dialogues are set at symposiums. The symposium itself is about a dinner party where everyone gives speeches about the nature of love. These weren't just social gatherings, they were where ideas were born, debated, refined. Entertainment included musicians, dancers, sometimes hired performers. Men would also play games like katabos, where you'd flick wine dregs at a target. They'd recite poetry, tell stories, sing. Women didn't attend these parties, except for entertainers and companions called hetaira, who were educated women who could participate in the intellectual conversations. Respectable married women stayed home. It was a different world. Fact 19, Children's Education. If you were a boy in Athens, you'd start school around age 7. You'd learn to read and write, study poetry, especially Homer, learn math and music. Physical education was huge too. Students would write on wax tablets with a stylus. You could smooth the wax and write again, reusable, like an ancient whiteboard. Paper was expensive, so this was the practical option. Music education meant learning to play the lyre or the flute. Every educated man was expected to be able to perform at parties. And they'd memorize huge amounts of poetry, whole books of the Iliad and Odyssey. Memory was the main storage device, you know? In Sparta, education was completely different, all about military training, endurance, discipline. But that's another story. Fact 20, Cosmetics and Perfumes. Greek women had quite a beauty routine. White lead for face powder to achieve that pale complexion that was considered beautiful. Red ochre for rouge on cheeks. Charcoal or soot for eye makeup. Unfortunately, that white lead was toxic, it could cause lead poisoning over time. But they didn't know that. Beauty was worth pursuing, whatever the cost. Perfumes were huge. Greeks loved scented oils: rose, iris, lily, myrrh. You'd rub these oils into your skin after bathing. Different perfumes for different occasions. There were even different perfumes for different body parts. Both men and women used perfumes, by the way. Smelling good was important for everyone. In a world before deodorant and with communal bathing practices, perfume did a lot of heavy lifting. We're settling in nicely now, just letting the facts wash over you, no effort needed. Fact 21, the gymnasium culture. Gymnasiums were central to Greek life, especially for younger men. These were complexes where men would exercise, bathe, socialize, and yes, discuss philosophy. Remember, they exercised naked, gymnos, right? They'd oil their bodies before exercising, which was partly for protection from the sun and partly aesthetic. After exercise, they'd scrape off the oil, sweat, and dirt with a curved tool called a strigil. Gymnasiums had different areas, spaces for running, wrestling, boxing, throwing discus and javelin. There'd be covered walkways for walking and talking. Bath areas with different temperature rooms. Philosophers would hang around gymnasiums teaching students. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum were basically sophisticated gymnasiums. The idea was that you develop body and mind together, physical strength and intellectual strength going hand in hand. That's where we get the term gymnasium for school in many languages today. The connection between physical and mental education. Fact 22: Slaves and household work. This is a harder fact to discuss, but it's important to understand. Ancient Greek society relied heavily on slave labor. In Athens, maybe a third of the population were slaves. Slaves did all kinds of work: domestic service, farming, mining, craftsmanship. Some were treated relatively well, especially household slaves. Others, particularly those in the silver mines, faced brutal conditions. Household slaves often became part of the family in a strange way, caring for children, managing the home, sometimes even conducting business on behalf of their owners. Some slaves could eventually buy their freedom. But they were still property, not people with rights. It's one of those things where we can appreciate Greek achievements in philosophy, democracy, art, while also acknowledging that their society had this fundamental injustice built into it. Human history is complicated like that. Fact 23: The olive oil economy. Olive oil was everything in ancient Greece. It wasn't just food, it was currency, medicine, fuel, soap, all rolled into one. People used it for cooking, obviously. But also for cleaning. They'd rub oil on their skin, then scrape it off, and that's how they'd bathe. Oil for lamps, giving light. Oil as an offering to the gods. Oil for athletes, as we mentioned. Athens exported olive oil all over the Mediterranean. Those distinctive black and red painted pottery amphoras you see in museums? Many of those were olive oil containers. They'd hold about 40 liters each, and ships would carry thousands of them. The olive tree itself was sacred to Athena, the patron goddess of Athens. According to myth, Athena and Poseidon competed for patronage of the city. Poseidon offered a spring of water, but it was salty. Athena offered an olive tree and won. Smart goddess. Olive trees can live for hundreds of years and keep producing. That's a gift that keeps on giving. Fact 24: Festival celebrations. The Greek calendar was packed with religious festivals. In Athens alone, there were over 120 festival days per year. That's a third of the year celebrating something. The Panathenea was the big one for Athens, honoring Athena. Every 4 years, they'd have a huge procession, athletic competitions, musical contests, and they'd present Athena's statue with a new robe, woven by the city's young women. The Dionysia festivals celebrated Dionysus, god of wine and theater. This is where the great plays were performed, tragedies and comedies. Playwrights would compete for prizes. It was part religious ritual, part entertainment, part civic pride. These festivals weren't just fun, they were essential to community life, to reinforcing shared values, to honoring the gods who they believed protected the city. Religion and daily life were completely intertwined. Fact 25: Medical practices. Greek medicine was surprisingly advanced for its time. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, established the idea that diseases had natural causes, not supernatural ones. Revolutionary thinking. The Hippocratic Oath that doctors still reference today? That comes from ancient Greek medical ethics. Do no harm. Keep patient information confidential. Teach the next generation. These are ancient principles. Greek doctors would diagnose illnesses by examining symptoms, checking pulse, looking at urine, tasting it even. Yes, they'd taste patients' urine to check for sweetness, which could indicate diabetes. Dedication to the craft, I guess. They performed surgeries too, setting broken bones, treating wounds, even trepanation, which is drilling holes in the skull. Some patients survived these procedures, which is pretty impressive given they didn't have anesthesia or antibiotics. They understood that environment, diet, and exercise affected health. Greek medicine was holistic, treat the whole person, not just symptoms. Fact 26. The art of pottery. Greek pottery wasn't just functional, it was high art. The painters who decorated vases were respected artists, and some even signed their work. There were two main styles, black figure and red figure. In black figure, you'd paint figures in black slip on the natural red clay. In red figure, you'd do the opposite, paint the background black and leave figures red. These vases tell us so much about daily life because they depicted everything: myths, sure, but also people working, exercising, shopping, partying, falling in love. They're like photographs of ancient life. Creating a perfect vase required incredible skill. The potter would shape it on a wheel, let it dry to just the right consistency, paint it, then fire it. The firing process was tricky, controlling temperature and oxygen to get the right colors. One mistake and the whole piece could crack or the colors could come out wrong. Many of these vases survived because they were exported all over the Mediterranean and buried in tombs in Italy and other places. We're lucky they did. Fact 27. Music and instruments. Music was everywhere in Greek life. At religious ceremonies, at symposiums, at the theater, at athletic competitions, at weddings and funerals. Everywhere. The lyre was the classic Greek instrument associated with Apollo, god of music and poetry. Every educated person learned to play it. It had 7 strings originally, made from sheep gut, and you'd pluck it or strum it. The aulos, often translated as flute, was actually more like an oboe, a double-reeded instrument. Played in pairs, one in each hand. Associated with Dionysus, so it had a more wild, emotional quality compared to the refined lyre. The Greeks believed music could affect your character and emotions. Different modes, different scales and melodies could make you brave, or thoughtful, or sad. This idea that music shapes the soul, it's still with us today, isn't it? We don't really know what Greek music sounded like. Musical notation was very basic. But we know it mattered deeply to them. Fact 28. Sports training. Athletes training for the Olympics or other games would follow intense regimens. They'd work with trainers called pediatribes who specialized in different sports. Diet was carefully controlled, lots of meat for strength, which was actually unusual since most Greeks ate a mostly vegetarian diet. Athletes would eat bread, cheese, dried figs, but also beef and pork, which was expensive. They'd practice their events endlessly. Runners had measured tracks. Wrestlers had sand pits. Discus and javelin throwers had designated practice areas. Boxers would practice with leather straps wrapped around their hands, much more brutal than modern boxing gloves. Before competition, athletes might visit a temple to pray and offer sacrifices. Some would also consult oracles or pay attention to omens. You'd do physical preparation, but spiritual preparation too. Winning an Olympic event would make you famous throughout Greece. Some winners got free meals for life in their home city. They'd commission statues of themselves. Poets would write odes about them. It was like being a modern celebrity athlete. Fact 29. Jury service. In Athens, juries were huge, sometimes 500 or more citizens for a single trial. Why so many? To prevent bribery. Can't bribe 500 people easily. Citizens would be selected randomly to serve on juries. They'd be paid a small amount for their service. Democracy needed to be accessible even for poor citizens who couldn't afford to miss work otherwise. There were no lawyers in the modern sense. You'd represent yourself, though you could hire someone to write your speech. Trials were timed with water clocks. Each side got equal time to present their case. After both sides spoke, the jury would vote immediately, no deliberation, no discussion. They'd use bronze tokens, dropping them into urns. The majority decided. Punishments could be severe exile, loss of citizenship, even death. But the process itself was remarkably democratic for its time. Every citizen had an equal vote in determining justice. Fact 30. The sacred temple spaces. Greek temples weren't like churches or mosques where people gathered for services. They were houses for the gods. The statue of the god or goddess would be inside, in the inner chamber called the cella. Only priests could enter that inner space. Regular people would worship outside, at altars in front of the temple. The Parthenon in Athens housed a massive statue of Athena 40 feet tall, made of gold and ivory over a wooden frame. The statue itself cost more than the building. People would come from all over just to see it. Temples were also treasuries. They stored valuable offerings, gold, silver, works of art. They were banks in a way. Cities would keep their emergency funds in temples. The architecture itself was full of subtle optical illusions. Columns would bulge slightly in the middle so they'd look straight from a distance. The floor would curve slightly upward. Architects understood human perception and used it to create these stunning visual effects. You're doing great, halfway through if you're still listening, but if you've drifted off, that's perfect too. Fact 31. Coming-of-age rituals. When Greek boys reached adolescence, they went through coming-of-age ceremonies. In Athens, around age 16 or 17, a boy would be enrolled in his father's phratry, which was like a clan or brotherhood. There'd be a ceremony, sacrifices, a feast. The boy would dedicate a lock of his hair to the gods, symbolizing leaving childhood behind. He'd start participating in men's activities, training for potential military service. For girls, the transition was marked by marriage. Before marriage, girls would dedicate their childhood toys and clothes to Artemis. They'd leave behind the things of girlhood. In Sparta, both boys and girls had more formal age-grade systems with tests and challenges. Spartan boys had to survive a year living in the wilderness, the agoge. It was harsh, but that was Spartan culture, creating warriors from childhood. These rituals gave structure to life, marked important transitions. We still have some version of this: graduations, bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras, marking the journey from child to adult. Fact 32. Seafaring and trade. The Greeks were magnificent sailors. Living on a peninsula and islands, they had to be. The sea connected them to the wider world. Greek ships called triremes had 3 banks of oars, powered by hundreds of rowers. They were fast and maneuverable. Merchant ships were wider, slower, powered by sails, designed to carry cargo. Greek traders sailed all over the Mediterranean and into the Black Sea. They'd export olive oil, wine, pottery, and bring back grain from Egypt, timber from Lebanon, metals from Spain. Navigation was partly by coastline, partly by stars. Sailors knew the winds and seasons intimately, when it was safe to sail, when storms were likely. Most ships stayed close to shore when possible. There are ancient shipwrecks all over the Mediterranean floor, and archaeologists still find them, full of amphoras and cargo. Each wreck tells a story of commerce, of risk, of the ancient global economy. Fact 33. Household gods. Every Greek home had a small altar or shrine. Families would worship household gods: Zeus Herkios, protector of the home; Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Daily worship was simple offerings of food, wine, incense. You'd pour a libation before meals, save a portion of food for the gods. Religion wasn't just big temple ceremonies, it was woven into everyday routines. The hearth fire was sacred, kept burning continuously if possible. When a family member was born, they'd be carried around the hearth in a welcoming ritual. When someone died, the hearth fire would be ritually extinguished and rekindled. These small, private religious acts connected family, home, and divine. They gave meaning and structure to domestic life. Fact 34: the alphabet. The Greek alphabet that we still partly use today, they didn't invent writing, but they did something revolutionary. They added vowels. Earlier writing systems like Phoenician only had consonants. You'd have to infer the vowels from context. The Greeks took that Phoenician system and created separate letters for vowels: alpha, epsilon, iota, omicron, upsilon. This made writing so much more precise and easier to learn. You could write exactly what you said and read it back unambiguously. The word alphabet itself comes from the first two Greek letters alpha and beta. And our word school comes from the Greek skol, which originally meant leisure. The Greeks invented the idea that education was how you used your free time. Think about it, thousands of years later, we're still using ideas and words that came from ancient Greek culture. That's lasting influence. Fact 35: clothing and fashion. Greek clothing was beautifully simple. For men, the main garment was a chiton, basically a rectangle of fabric, wrapped and pinned at the shoulders, belted at the waist. For women, the peplos, or a longer chiton. Over this, you might wear a himation, a large piece of fabric draped over one shoulder and around the body, like a cloak. The way you draped it showed sophistication and style. Colors varied by wealth and occasion. The wealthy could afford purple dye, which came from sea snails and was incredibly expensive, thousands of snails for a tiny amount of dye. So purple clothing meant wealth and status. Most people wore undyed wool or linen, maybe in white or natural colors. Simple, but elegant. In hot weather, you'd wear light linen. In winter, heavier wool. There's something lovely about the simplicity, don't you think? One basic garment, worn different ways, suitable for all occasions. Fact 36: mathematics and geometry. The Greeks were obsessed with mathematics, especially geometry. Pythagoras and his theorem about right triangles, that's from ancient Greece. Euclid's Elements, the geometry textbook that students studied for 2,000 years, ancient Greece. But it wasn't just practical math. The Greeks saw math as philosophy, as a way to understand the divine order of the universe. Numbers had mystical properties. Shapes had perfect forms. The golden ratio, the idea of mathematical beauty, that's Greek too. They'd use mathematical proportions in architecture, in art, in music. Everything was connected through mathematical harmony. Archimedes, one of the greatest mathematicians ever, was Greek. Legend says he was so focused on solving a geometry problem during the siege of Syracuse that when a Roman soldier confronted him, Archimedes said, "Don't disturb my circles." The soldier killed him anyway. Even in death, devoted to mathematics. That was the Greek way. Fact 37: courtship and love. Love and romance existed, but marriage was usually arranged. For Athenian women, marriages were primarily about creating alliances between families and producing legitimate children. But that doesn't mean there wasn't affection. Families tried to make good matches. And love could grow after marriage. We have letters, poems, epitaphs showing genuine affection between spouses. Romantic love was talked about extensively in philosophy and literature, though. The Greeks had different words for different types of love: eros for passionate love, philia for friendship love, storge for family love, agape for universal love. Same-sex relationships between men were accepted in certain contexts, particularly between older and younger men. This was seen as part of mentorship and education. Women's relationships with each other are less documented, but the poet Sappho from the island of Lesbos wrote beautiful love poetry to women. Love is complicated in any culture, any era. The Greeks were trying to understand it, just like we still are. Fact 38. Burial practices. The Greeks believed you needed a proper burial to enter the afterlife. Without funeral rites, your soul would wander forever on the banks of the river Styx, unable to cross. When someone died, women of the family would wash and prepare the body, dress it in white, place a coin in the mouth, payment for Charon, the ferryman who'd carry the soul across the Styx. The body would be displayed at home for mourning. Family and friends would visit, bring offerings. Women would tear their hair and clothes in grief, wail, and lament. This wasn't quiet mourning, it was loud, demonstrative. Then came the funeral procession, usually before dawn, to the cemetery outside the city walls. They'd either bury the body or cremate it. Grave goods would be included: favorite possessions, food for the journey, oil flasks. Afterward, there'd be a feast, more offerings at the grave site on specific days. The dead were never really gone, they remained part of the family, honored and remembered. Fact 39. The afterlife. Greek ideas about the afterlife were complex and changed over time. In Homer's epics, the afterlife, Hades, was a gloomy place where shades of the dead existed in a diminished state, barely conscious. But later beliefs included places like the Elysian fields for heroes and the virtuous, a paradise of eternal spring and happiness. And Tartarus for the wicked, a pit below Hades where punishment was eternal. Most Greeks believed in some form of judgment after death. Your actions in life mattered. Justice continued beyond the grave. Mystery religions like the Eleusinian mysteries promised initiates a better afterlife. The exact nature was secret. Initiates were forbidden to reveal what they learned, but it gave comfort and hope. Death wasn't the end. That's something humans have always wanted to believe, isn't it? That this life isn't all there is. Fact 40. Street life. Greek cities were bustling, crowded, full of life. Streets were narrow, winding, uneven. Houses turned inward around courtyards, so the streets were lined with plain walls, just doorways breaking them up. You'd hear the sounds of the city: metalworkers hammering, potters' wheels spinning, merchants calling out their wares, children playing, animals, chickens, goats, dogs wandering around. Streets could be messy. People threw garbage out, though there were designated spots and workers who'd collect it. Wealthy neighborhoods were cleaner than poorer ones, naturally. Most activity happened in public spaces: the agora, the gymnasium, the theater. Homes were for private family life, sleeping, eating. Public life was where things happened. Imagine that your life primarily lived outdoors, in public spaces, surrounded by your fellow citizens constantly. Very different from our private, indoor-focused lives now. Fact 41. Superstitions. The Greeks were wonderfully superstitious. Sneezing was a sign from the gods. A good sneeze meant the gods approved of what you were doing. You'd pause and acknowledge it. Seeing birds and interpreting their flight patterns, that was serious business. Certain birds were messengers from specific gods. An eagle might be a sign from Zeus. An owl meant Athena was watching. Bad omens required purification rituals. You'd make offerings, say prayers, maybe visit a temple. Better safe than sorry when it comes to divine displeasure. Breaking a mirror wasn't unlucky. Mirrors were rare and expensive, so breaking one was just wasteful. But spilling wine or salt? That required ritual cleansing. Even philosophers, rational thinkers, often believed in omens and signs. Religion and reason coexisted in fascinating ways. Fact 42: Astronomy. The Greeks were keen astronomers, mapping the stars and planets. They identified constellations, many of which we still use today. Orion, Ursa Major, the zodiac. These are Greek. They understood that Earth was round, not flat. Pythagoras and later Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth based on observations, the way ships disappear over the horizon, the shape of Earth's shadow during lunar eclipses. Aristarchus even proposed that Earth orbited the Sun, not the other way around. This was 1,800 years before Copernicus. Most Greeks didn't accept it. The idea seemed to contradict common sense and observation, but the theory existed. They calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. Eratosthenes used shadows in different cities to figure it out. Ancient scientists doing serious work. Looking up at the night sky, they saw order, pattern, divine harmony. The cosmos made sense. Fact 43: Timekeeping. Greeks didn't have mechanical clocks, but they measured time carefully. Sundials were common, a stick or column casting a shadow that moved as the sun crossed the sky. Water clocks, clepsydra, were used when you needed precision, like timing speeches in court. Water would drip from one container to another at a steady rate. When the water ran out, your time was up. The day was divided into 12 hours of daylight and 12 of darkness, but the length of an hour varied by season. Summer daylight hours were longer than winter ones. Time wasn't fixed, it was flexible. People woke with the sun, worked during daylight, rested after dark. Life followed natural rhythms more than we do now with our artificial light and strict schedules. There's something peaceful about that idea, isn't it? Time tied to nature, not to a clock. Fact 44: Children's games. Greek children played games that seem remarkably familiar. They had balls, hoops they'd roll with sticks, dolls, miniature carts and animals. Knucklebones, small bones from sheep or goats, were used like dice or jacks. You'd toss them and try to catch them in different ways. It was a game of skill and chance. Older children played more complex games, board games that were like checkers or backgammon. They'd play tug-of-war, hide-and-seek, blind man's bluff. Baby rattles have been found in excavations, little pottery containers with pebbles inside that would make noise when shaken. Some things transcend time. Babies like noise, children like play, humans like fun. It's sweet, really. A child in ancient Athens laughing while playing with friends, not so different from children today. Fact 45: Metalworking. Greek metalworkers were skilled artisans. They worked with bronze, iron, gold, silver, creating everything from weapons to jewelry to sculptures. Bronze was the main metal for most of Greek history, a mix of copper and tin. Bronze statues, bronze armor, bronze tools. The famous bronze statues we know of mostly from Roman marble copies, the originals were often melted down for the metal. Gold and silver jewelry was exquisite, filigree work so delicate it's hard to believe it was made without magnification. Rings, bracelets, earrings, necklaces with intricate designs. Iron came into wider use over time. Iron swords and spears, iron tools for farming and construction. Working with iron required different skills, higher temperatures, different techniques. Each metalworker had their specialty. You'd train for years as an apprentice, learning the craft. Pride in workmanship meant something. We're about halfway through our time together, but don't worry about the time. Just rest. Fact 46. Healing temples. There were temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine, where sick people would go for healing. The most famous was at Epidaurus. You'd arrive, purify yourself with ritual baths, make offerings. Then you'd sleep in a special area called an abaton. During the night, Asclepius would supposedly visit you in a dream and either heal you directly or tell you what treatment you needed. Priests would interpret your dreams and prescribe treatments, herbs, diet changes, exercise, rest. Sometimes surgery. These temples had theaters, baths, exercise facilities. They were early health retreats, in a way. The combination of rest, clean water, good food, hope, and medical care actually helped many people. We found inscriptions where people recorded their cures. Some sound genuinely medical, some sound more like faith healing. But belief itself can heal sometimes, can't it? Fact 47. Weather and seasons. The Greeks organized their year around agricultural cycles and religious festivals. Summer was harvest time, hot and dry. Winter brought rain, necessary for next year's crops. They understood that weather was controlled by the gods. Zeus brought rain and thunder. Poseidon caused earthquakes and storms at sea. You respected these forces because you depended on them. Farmers watched the stars to know when to plant and harvest. Hesiod's Works and Days is basically a farmer's almanac from 700 BCE. It tells you when to plow, when to plant, when to expect different weather. Bad weather, crop failure, drought, these were divine displeasure. You'd increase offerings, hold special rituals, pray for better conditions. Living so close to nature, dependent on weather and seasons, they had a relationship with the natural world that we've largely lost. Fact 48. Naming conventions. Greek names often had meanings. Sophocles means famous for wisdom. Aristocles means best and most renowned. That was Plato's real name. Plato was a nickname meaning broad, possibly referring to his shoulders or his forehead. Children would often be named after grandparents. The oldest son might be named after the paternal grandfather, second son after the maternal grandfather. This kept names and honor in the family line. Names invoked gods or virtues. Theodora means gift of God, Nikephoros means bringer of victory. Your name was a statement, a blessing, a hope for who you'd become. Slaves and freed slaves had different naming patterns. A freed slave might take their former master's name as a surname. Names told stories of identity, family, status. Fact 49. Fishing and seafood. Greeks ate a lot of fish. It was more common than meat for most people. The sea provided abundance. Tuna, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, mullet, octopus, squid. Fishermen would go out in small boats with nets or lines. They'd fish at night sometimes, using lights to attract fish. It was hard, dangerous work, but essential. Fish would be grilled, fried in olive oil, preserved in salt or brine. The Greeks made a fish sauce called gyros or garum, similar to what the Romans later made famous, fermented fish that added savory flavor to dishes. For inland cities, getting fresh fish was harder and more expensive. But coastal cities had fish markets where you'd buy the day's catch. The smell of grilling fish from street vendors, the calls of fishmongers in the agora, these were the sounds and smells of Greek coastal life. Fact 50. Libraries and books. Books were precious objects in ancient Greece. Written on papyrus scrolls or parchment, copied by hand, they represented significant investment of time and money. Private libraries existed for wealthy individuals who could afford to collect texts. Some philosophers had extensive personal libraries. The most famous library was at Alexandria in Egypt, a Greek city founded by Alexander the Great. It aimed to collect all the world's knowledge. Scholars estimated had hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scrolls were kept in cylindrical cases, organized by subject. You'd unroll them as you read, then roll them back up. No page numbers, no index, you had to know your texts well to find things. When that library burned over several incidents, entire works were lost forever. What we've kept from ancient Greek literature is a fraction of what existed. So many voices, silenced by fire and time. Fact 51. Dance. Dance was an important part of Greek culture, tied to religion, celebration, and theater. There were religious dances performed at festivals, dances that told stories, dances that honored gods. In Greek theater, the chorus would dance as they sang. These weren't just random movements, they were choreographed, meaningful, part of the storytelling. At symposiums, there'd be dancing, sometimes by professional dancers, sometimes by the guests themselves after enough wine. Young people would learn traditional dances as part of their education. Military dances existed too, practice dances that trained young men in coordinated movement, weapon handling, battle formations. Dance as training, dance as art. We don't know exactly what Greek dance looked like. There were no video cameras, no detailed descriptions. But we know it mattered, that it was everywhere in their lives. Fact 52. Architecture innovation. Greek architecture wasn't just beautiful, it was innovative. The three orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, each had their own proportions, their own aesthetics. Doric was sturdy and simple, thick columns, plain capitals. Think of the Parthenon. Ionic was more elegant, slimmer columns with scroll-like capitals. Corinthian was the fanciest, capitals decorated with acanthus leaves. They engineered solutions to challenging problems. How do you span a wide space without the roof collapsing? How do you make columns that look straight when perspective makes straight lines look bowed? The entasis, that slight outward curve in column shafts, corrects for optical illusion. The slight upward curve of temple floors does the same. Everything was calculated to look perfect to human eyes. These buildings have stood for thousands of years, through earthquakes and wars. That's engineering. Fact 53. Textile work. Most Greek women spent significant time spinning thread and weaving cloth. This wasn't just practical work, it was skilled, valued labor. Women would spin wool or linen into thread using a spindle and distaff. Then they'd weave it on looms, large vertical looms that stood upright. The cloth they produced would be used for family clothing, blankets, household textiles. Wealthy women would weave elaborate patterns, sometimes incorporating gold thread. The cloth they produced could be a source of pride and prestige. Penelope in the Odyssey famously weaves during the day and unweaves at night, stalling her suitors. This weaving skill was something every woman would understand: the time, the effort, the skill involved. In mythology, the fates themselves are spinners and weavers, creating the threads of human life. Textile work wasn't just practical, it was metaphysically significant. Fact 54. Drinking vessels. Greeks had different cups and vessels for different purposes. The kylix was a wide, shallow drinking cup with two handles, perfect for symposiums. You'd hold it by the handles, sip your wine. The kantharos was deeper, with high handles, associated with Dionysus. The skiphos was a deeper cup for everyday drinking. The rhyton was a fancy vessel shaped like an animal head. Pour wine in the top, it comes out the mouth. These weren't just functional objects, they were works of art, painted with scenes from mythology or daily life. You'd drink from them while looking at the images inside as the wine level dropped. At the end of symposiums, men would play katabos, flinging wine dregs from their cup at a target. Points for accuracy, for style. Drinking games are ancient. Fact 55. Trade routes. Greek traders established routes all across the Mediterranean and Black Sea. They founded colonies in new cities from Spain to the Black Sea coast. These weren't colonies in the imperial sense, they were independent cities, maintaining connections with their mother city. Colonies provided access to resources. Grain from the Black Sea, metals from Spain, timber from Macedonia. Trade goods flowed constantly. Greek merchants would set up permanent trading posts, marry local women, create mixed communities. Culture spread through trade. Greek pottery and ideas reached Gaul, North Africa, the Middle East. Pirates were a constant threat. Merchants would travel in groups when possible, stay close to shore, avoid dangerous seasons. It was risky business, but profitable for those who succeeded. Fact 56. Beauty standards. Beauty standards were specific and culturally shaped, like they always are. For women, pale skin was ideal, it showed you didn't have to work outdoors. Fuller figures were preferred, it showed prosperity. For men, the ideal was athletic, muscular but proportional, like the statues we see. A good body showed discipline, training, virtue. Both men and women removed unwanted body hair. Greeks valued smooth skin. They used pumice stones, bronze razors, even early forms of waxing with resins. Large eyes were considered beautiful. Small feet for women. Wavy hair. Straight noses. Every culture has its specific ideals, doesn't it? And people have always tried to meet them. Fact 57. The underworld. Hades, the underworld, wasn't hell exactly. It was where everyone went after death, good and bad alike. Most souls went to the Asphodel Meadows, a neutral place of shadow existence. To get there, you'd cross the river Styx, ferry by Charon, that's why the coin in the mouth. Then past Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding the entrance. Exceptional heroes might go to Elysium. Terrible criminals went to Tartarus for punishment, people like Tantalus, eternally hungry and thirsty with food and water just out of reach, or Sisyphus, rolling his boulder up a hill forever. The living could visit the underworld in myths. Orpheus went to retrieve his wife, Odysseus went to consult the dead. These journeys to the realm of death and back represented transformation, wisdom gained. Fact 58. Perfume production. Making perfume was complex chemistry. You'd extract scents from flowers, herbs, tree resins using oil infusion. Take rose petals, steep them in olive oil, let the oil absorb the scent. Different plants gave different scents: roses, lilies, violets, iris, mint, thyme, myrrh, frankincense. Perfume makers were skilled artisans, knowing which combinations worked, how to extract maximum scent. Perfumes would be stored in small alabaster or ceramic bottles, alabastra. These bottles themselves were beautiful objects, sometimes given as gifts. Both men and women wore perfume liberally. After bathing, you'd anoint yourself with scented oil. Different perfumes for different occasions, different body parts. It was an art. Fact 59. Legal status of women. Women's legal status was limited in most Greek city-states. In Athens, women couldn't own significant property, couldn't enter into contracts, needed a male guardian, father, husband, or male relative to represent them legally. But daily reality was more complex. Women ran households, which included managing slaves, overseeing production, making economic decisions. In their husband's absence, they'd handle affairs. In Sparta, as we mentioned, women had more freedom, could own property, had physical education, spoke their minds. Poorer women had more freedom of movement than wealthy ones. They might work outside the home, sell goods at market, run businesses. Wealth brought restrictions in some ways. It wasn't fair by modern standards, but women found ways to exercise influence, to have agency within the constraints they faced. Fact 60. Military service. In most Greek city-states, military service was a citizen's duty. Men were expected to arm themselves and fight when needed. In Athens, you'd serve in the military from age 18 to about 60, though active campaigning was mostly for younger men. You'd provide your own armor and weapons: helmet, breastplate, shield, spear. This made military service tied to wealth. Poor citizens couldn't afford heavy armor. The phalanx formation, rows of heavily armed infantry, shields overlapping, spears forward, required discipline and coordination. You fought shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, your friends. Breaking formation meant death for everyone. Sparta's entire society was organized around military excellence. Boys entered military training at age 7. Men lived in barracks even after marriage until age 30. It was extreme, but it made Sparta's army feared throughout Greece. War was frequent, brutal, accepted as part of life. Not glorified exactly, but understood as necessary. Still with you, letting these stories flow over you like gentle waves. Fact 61. The symposium format. Let's talk more about symposiums, because they were central to elite male social life. After dinner, the drinking and entertainment would begin. A symposiarch, a sort of master of ceremonies, would be chosen. He'd decide how much water to mix with the wine, set rules for the evening's entertainment. Entertainment might include poetry recitation. Each guest would take turns improvising or reciting verses. Riddles and word games. Philosophical discussions. Sometimes things got competitive. Who could compose the best poem on the spot about a given topic? Music, dancing, acrobats, flute girls, hired entertainment. Sometimes things would get wild as the night went on and more wine flowed. But these gatherings were also where politics happened, where business deals were made, where ideas were exchanged. They were important social institutions, not just parties. Fact 62. Childbirth. Childbirth was dangerous for ancient women. Many women died in childbirth or from complications afterward. It was one of the leading causes of death for women of childbearing age. Women would be assisted by midwives, experienced women who'd learned the craft. A midwife would help manage labor, cut the umbilical cord, check the baby. Women would pray to Artemis and Eileithyia, goddesses of childbirth. They'd make offerings, hope for divine protection. If a baby was born with severe defects or if the family couldn't support another child, exposure was legally and socially accepted, though evidence suggests it wasn't as common as we once thought. Still, it happened, particularly with girls in poor families. A hard reality of ancient life. The value placed on children who survived was intense. They represented the future, the continuation of the family line. Fact 63. Armor and weapons. A hoplite, a heavy infantry soldier, would carry about 50 to 70 pounds of equipment. Bronze helmet, breastplate, greaves for the legs. A large round shield called a hoplon or aspes. A spear about 7 to 9 feet long. A short sword for backup. The helmet designs evolved. Corinthian helmets covered the whole head with slits for eyes and mouth. Later designs were more open, allowing better vision and hearing but less protection. Shields were covered in bronze, with a distinctive device painted on them, either a family symbol or, in Sparta, the letter lambda for Lacedaemon. The shield was held on your left arm, protecting you and the man to your left. Losing your shield was deeply shameful. Before battle, soldiers would oil and polish their armor. It was both practical, preventing rust, and psychological. You wanted to look magnificent and terrifying. Fact 64. The theater experience. Going to the theater in Athens was a civic event. The theater of Dionysus could hold 15,000 to 17,000 people, a huge portion of the city's population. Plays were performed during religious festivals, particularly the city Dionysia. You'd watch 3 tragedies and a satyr play in a row, then 3 more the next day, a marathon of theater. Seating was organized by social status. The front rows for officials, priests, honored citizens. Behind them, other citizens. Slaves and women, when allowed, in the back or sides. There was no lighting. Plays were performed in daytime, using the sun. The acoustics were amazing. You could sit in the back row and hear every word from the stage. Audiences were engaged, responsive. They'd shout approval or disapproval, throw food if they disliked a performance. Active participation, not quiet passive watching. Fact 65. Sacrificial practices. Animal sacrifice was central to Greek religion. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, different animals for different occasions and gods. The ritual had specific steps. The animal would be decorated, led in procession, sprinkled with water and barley. When it nodded, shook its head from the water, that was consent, a good omen. The throat would be cut, blood collected and poured as an offering. The animal butchered, certain parts, thigh bones wrapped in fat, burned for the gods. The rest would be cooked and eaten by the worshippers. So sacrifice was also a feast, a way of sharing a meal with the divine. The community gathered, ate together, reinforced social bonds. Religion and social life were inseparable. We have thousands of bones from ancient sanctuaries, evidence of these countless sacrifices over centuries. Fact 66. Wrestling. Wrestling was one of the most popular sports. It was part of the pentathlon in the Olympics, and also a standalone event. Wrestlers would oil their bodies, then cover themselves in dust or sand. This gave grip, prevented slipping. The wrestling style was similar to Greco-Roman wrestling today. You'd try to throw your opponent to the ground, make them fall 3 times to win. Training was intense. Wrestlers would practice moves, build strength, study strategy. There were wrestling trainers, famous champions, local heroes known for their skill. Wrestling was also philosophical training. Plato was apparently a skilled wrestler. The discipline, the strategy, the physical and mental toughness, it all tied into ideas of excellence and virtue. Fact 67. Harvest time. Harvest was crucial. Your survival for the next year depended on it. Grain harvest in late spring, olive harvest in late fall, grape harvest in early fall. The whole community would help. You'd work dawn to dusk cutting grain with sickles, gathering it into sheaves, threshing it on circular threshing floors where animals would walk over it to separate grain from chaff. Women would bake the grain into barley cakes or make porridge. Grapes would be crushed. People would stomp them with bare feet in large vats, the juice flowing out into containers. Some harvest would be set aside as offerings to the gods in thanksgiving. First fruits were sacred. You honored Demeter, goddess of grain, Dionysus, god of wine. A good harvest meant celebrating. A bad harvest meant worry, rationing, maybe hunger in winter. Every harvest was significant. Fact 68. Coinage. The development of standardized coinage was a Greek innovation. Before coins, trade was barter or used precious metal by weight. Greek cities began minting coins around 600 BCE. Each city-state had its own designs. Athens had an owl and Athena, Corinth had Pegasus. The images declared civic identity. Coins made trade easier, standardized value, portable, divisible. You could buy small items with small denomination coins, or large items with big silver coins. But coins were also political. Rulers in cities put their images and symbols on coins, declaring power, spreading propaganda, ensuring everyone knew who was in charge. Some ancient Greek coins are works of art, tiny portraits, beautiful designs, struck by hand on small metal discs. Fact 69. Textile dyeing. Creating colored fabric involved complex processes. Red dye from madder root, indigo blue from woad plants, yellow from saffron or weld, purple from murex shells. The famous Tyrian purple, that incredibly expensive purple dye, required thousands of murex snails for a tiny amount. Collectors would gather snails, extract a small gland from each, ferment it, process it. The result was a purple dye so valuable it was worth its weight in silver. Dyers would need to understand chemistry, how to prepare fabric, how long to soak it, how to fix the dye so it wouldn't wash out. Different mordants, metallic salts, would change how dyes adhered and what shade they produced. Dyeing workshops were smelly, the fermentation, the chemicals. They'd be located on city outskirts. But the results were magnificent, vibrant colored fabrics that were objects of desire. Fact 70. Elder respect. Greek society generally respected elders. Old age was associated with wisdom, experience, closer connection to ancestors and tradition. In assemblies and councils, older men often spoke first, and their opinions carried weight. In Sparta, the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, was powerful, making major decisions for the state. That said, old age was also feared, the loss of strength, vigor, beauty. Greek poetry is full of laments about aging. But publicly, elders were treated with deference. In myth, wise elders often guide younger heroes, Nestor in the Iliad, Chiron the centaur teaching Achilles. The elder as mentor, as keeper of knowledge. Family care for aging parents was expected. It was both moral duty and social expectation. You cared for those who cared for you. Fact 71. Water management. Greeks were sophisticated with water engineering. Aqueducts brought fresh water from springs to cities. Underground clay pipes distributed it through neighborhoods. Public fountains were social gathering places. Women would go to collect water, chat, exchange news. Some fountains were elaborately decorated, funded by wealthy citizens. Athens had an extensive underground water system, tunnels carved through rock to bring water from Mount Hymettus. Citizens took for granted infrastructure that required massive engineering effort. Baths used both heated and cold water. Drains carried waste away. Some homes of the wealthy had indoor plumbing, quite advanced for the time. Fact 72. Pets. Greeks kept pets, particularly dogs. Hunting dogs, guard dogs, companion dogs, they're shown in pottery paintings, mentioned in literature. Dogs had names, personalities, were mourned when they died. Cats existed but weren't as common as dogs, they weren't really domesticated yet in Greece. But we have evidence of pet birds, especially songbirds kept in cages. Alexander the Great famously loved his horse Bucephalus so much that when the horse died, he founded a city named after him, Bucephala. Animals mattered. They were workers, yes, but also companions. That bond between humans and animals, that's ancient. Fact 73. Debt and slavery. Before Solon's reforms in Athens, debt slavery was common. If you couldn't pay your debts, you could be enslaved. Families would lose their freedom, their land, everything. Solon abolished debt slavery for Athenian citizens around 594 BCE. He freed those enslaved for debt, forgave debts, and banned the practice going forward. Revolutionary. This helped create a citizen body that could participate in democracy without fear of enslavement. It was one of the foundations of Athenian democratic development. But slavery continued for non-citizens, war captives, purchased slaves, people born into slavery. The freedom from debt slavery only applied to citizens. The system remained deeply unjust for many. Fact 74. Mathematics in daily life. Ordinary people used practical math constantly. Merchants calculating prices, builders measuring dimensions, farmers dividing land, cooks scaling recipes. The Greeks used both finger counting and counting boards. Early calculators with pebbles moved in grooves. The word calculate comes from calculus, the Latin word for pebble. Fractions were understood and used, though their notation was different from ours. Measurements for volume, weight, distance all standardized within each city-state, though standards varied between cities. Math wasn't just abstract philosophy for Greeks, it was the practical tool that made commerce, construction, and daily life function. Fact 75. Messenger systems. Communication over distance was slow but organized. Professional messengers would run between cities carrying news, letters, official documents. The famous story of Pheidippides running from Marathon to Athens to announce victory, about 26 miles, then dying from exhaustion. Whether that's literally true or not, it reflects the reality of messenger runners. Ships carried messages across water. Fire beacons on hills could signal news quickly over distances. Different patterns of fires meant different messages. A network of communication, primitive but effective. Important messages would be memorized, not just written, in case the written document was lost or intercepted. Oral transmission was trusted and valued. We're getting deeper into the night now. You're breathing slower, your mind drifting. That's perfect. Fact 76. Tattoos and body modification. Greeks generally didn't tattoo themselves. Tattoos were associated with barbarians, slaves, or criminals. Slaves might be tattooed to mark ownership or to identify them if they fled. But some Greeks did modify their bodies in other ways. Athletes would build muscle deliberately. Some people used cosmetics extensively, essentially modifying their appearance. Jewelry was common, piercings for earrings. The Greek ideal was natural beauty, moderation. Extreme modifications were seen as excessive, barbarian. Though like all ideals, reality was more varied. Fact 77. Food preservation. Without refrigeration, preserving food was essential. Salt for preserving meat and fish. Olive oil for preserving vegetables. You'd submerge them in oil and seal jars. Drying was common. Dried fish, dried fruits like figs and raisins. Fermentation for wine, cheese, that fish sauce we mentioned. Honey as a preservative for fruits. Grain was stored in large ceramic containers called pithoi, huge jars, sometimes taller than a person. These would be kept in storerooms, protected from moisture and pests. Smoke curing for meat and fish. Pickling in vinegar. Every culture develops ways to make food last, but the Greeks were particularly good at it, living in a hot climate where food spoiled quickly. Fact 78. Rhetoric and persuasion. The ability to speak well was a prized skill. Rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, was taught formally. Young men would study under sophists, teachers who specialized in rhetoric and argumentation. In a direct democracy where any citizen could propose laws and every decision was debated publicly, being persuasive mattered enormously. Your ability to speak could determine policy, could win court cases, could advance your political career. Rhetoric wasn't just about fancy words, it was about structure, logic, emotional appeal, understanding your audience. Aristotle wrote extensively about rhetoric as both an art and a science. Great speakers were celebrated. Demosthenes, considered the greatest Greek orator, supposedly practiced speaking with pebbles in his mouth and shouting over ocean waves to strengthen his voice. Dedication to the craft. Fact 79. Mountain sanctuaries. Some sanctuaries were built on remote mountain peaks. Places like certain peaks on Mount Olympus, though not the summit that was for the gods, or mountain sanctuaries dedicated to Zeus. Reaching these places required a pilgrimage, a difficult climb, sometimes taking days. The journey itself was part of the religious experience. Once there, you'd make offerings, possibly participate in secret rites. The isolation, the physical challenge, the thin air at altitude, it all created an altered state, a feeling of being closer to the divine. Mountains were liminal spaces between earth and sky, between human and divine. Fact 80. Ship construction. Building a trireme, a warship, required enormous skill and resources. The hull was constructed with overlapping planks, carefully shaped and fitted. The keel had to be strong and straight. 3 rows of oars, 170 rowers in total, had to be positioned so they could row efficiently without interfering with each other. This required precise engineering. Ships were built in shipyards, often near the water. Skilled shipwrights would train for years. The best shipbuilders were valued, sought after, sometimes even lured away by rival cities. A completed trireme represented a massive investment: the wood, the labor, the rowers' wages. Maintaining a navy was one of the most expensive things a city-state could do. Fact 81. Childhood toys. Beyond the yo-yos we mentioned, children had lots of toys. Terracotta animals, miniature cooking sets, toy swords and shields for boys. Dolls with jointed limbs for girls, sometimes with whole wardrobes of tiny clothes. Hobby horses, sticks with horse heads. Spinning tops. Balls made of leather stuffed with hair or cloth. Simple wheeled toys pulled on strings. These toys were sometimes buried with children who died young, a heartbreaking tradition showing both the reality of childhood mortality and the love parents had for their children. Play was understood as important for development. Children played, learned, prepared for adult roles through their games. Fact 82. Taxation. In Athens, citizens generally didn't pay direct taxes. Instead, the wealthy had a system called liturgies, public service obligations. If you were rich enough, you might be assigned to fund a warship for a year, pay for the crew, maintenance, everything. Or fund a dramatic production at a festival, pay for the actors, costumes, chorus. Or host a public feast. It was a way of distributing public costs to those who could afford it, while also giving them public honor and recognition. Your name would be announced, everyone would know you funded this warship or that play. There were also indirect taxes, harbor fees, market fees, sales taxes on certain goods. Medics, foreign residents, paid a special tax for the privilege of living in the city. Fact 83. Historical writing. The Greeks invented historical writing as we know it. Herodotus, called the father of history, traveled extensively and wrote about the Persian Wars, trying to understand causes and effects, gathering sources. Thucydides wrote about the Peloponnesian War with even more analytical rigor, examining motivations, strategies, political decisions. He wanted to create a work useful for understanding how and why events happened. Before this, you had myths, legends, epic poetry, not systematic investigation of actual events. The Greek historians created a new way of understanding the past. Their work survives, telling us not just about events but about how Greeks saw themselves and their world. Fact 84. The concept of xenia. Xenia, guest friendship, was sacred. If a stranger came to your door, you were obligated to offer hospitality. Food, shelter, protection. You'd host them without asking who they were or why they came. Questions came only after offering hospitality. This wasn't just good manners, it was a religious obligation. Zeus Xenios protected guests and hosts. To harm a guest or refuse hospitality brought divine punishment. Xenia created bonds between families across cities. If you hosted someone, that created a relationship lasting generations. Their descendants could visit your descendants and expect hospitality. In a world where travel was dangerous and inns were rare, Xenia made long-distance travel possible. It built networks of trust across the Greek world. Fact 85: Funerary monuments. Greeks marked graves with monuments, simple stone markers, elaborate sculptures, or even architectural structures for the very wealthy. These monuments often showed the deceased in life, a warrior with his weapons, a woman with her jewelry, a child with toys. Inscriptions would record name, family, sometimes an epitaph. Here lies so-and-so, who died too young, or a beloved father, missed by his children. Brief, poignant statements. Visitors would leave offerings, locks of hair, libations, flowers. The dead were still part of the community, still remembered, still honored. Walking through an ancient cemetery, reading these inscriptions, you see individual human lives, loves, losses, hopes. History becomes personal. Fact 86: Farming techniques. Greek farming was hard work with simple tools. Wooden plows pulled by oxen would turn the soil. Manual hoeing for weeding. Hand sickles for harvesting grain. Farmers understood crop rotation, letting fields lie fallow to recover fertility. They'd plant legumes, beans, lentils, which helped restore nitrogen to the soil, though they didn't understand the chemistry of why. Terracing on hillsides created level planting areas, prevented erosion. Stone walls would hold the soil, creating step-like fields up mountainsides. This required enormous labor but made farming possible on steep terrain. The farming calendar dictated life: plow in fall, plant in early winter when rains came, harvest in late spring and summer. Everyone knew the agricultural rhythms. Fact 87: Hair as offering. Cutting hair as an offering to gods was common at transitions. Young people would dedicate a lock of hair when coming of age. Women would cut hair when mourning. Hair represented life force in a way: it grew from you, was part of you. Offering it was offering part of yourself to the divine. We found containers at temples full of hair offerings, thousands of locks, each representing someone's prayer, someone's transition, someone's grief. It's such a human gesture, giving something of yourself, hoping the gods notice, hoping they care. Fact 88: Mining operations. Silver mines, especially at Laurion near Athens, were crucial to the city's wealth. These mines went deep underground, dangerous, dark, hot. Slaves did most mining work under brutal conditions. They'd chip away at rock face with picks, carry ore in baskets up narrow shafts. The work was exhausting, the air was bad, accidents were common. The silver extracted funded Athens' navy, its building projects, its democracy. The beautiful Parthenon, the powerful fleet built on the backs of enslaved miners. We can't talk about Greek achievements without acknowledging the exploitation that funded them. It's important to hold both truths. Fact 89: Sculptural techniques. Greek sculptors achieved incredible realism. They understood anatomy, muscles, bones, how bodies move and balance. For bronze statues, they'd use the lost wax method: create a wax model, cover it in clay, heat it so the wax melts out, pour molten bronze into the mold. Incredibly precise work. Marble sculptors would work from detailed clay or wax models, using measuring tools to transfer proportions to the marble block. then careful chiseling, filing, polishing. A major statue could take years. The best sculptors were famous, sought after. Phidias, Praxiteles, Myron, their names were known throughout Greece. Art wasn't anonymous craft, individual genius was recognized and celebrated. Fact 90. The Agoge in Sparta. Spartan boys entered the Agoge, the training system, at age 7. They'd leave home, live in barracks with other boys, under harsh conditions. They'd be given minimal food, intentionally forced to steal to supplement their diet. If caught stealing, they'd be beaten, not for stealing but for being caught. It taught cunning, resourcefulness. Physical training was intense: running, wrestling, fighting. They'd sleep on reed beds they made themselves, wear minimal clothing even in winter. The point was to create toughness, endurance, unit cohesion. At age 20, they'd join the military. They'd continue living in barracks until age 30, even if married. Sparta was a military society, everything oriented toward creating excellent soldiers. We're in the home stretch now, almost there. Let your mind float along with these final stories. Fact 91. Wine varieties. Greeks grew many grape varieties, producing different wine styles. Island wines were particularly prized: wine from Chios, Lesbos, Thassos. Each region had its reputation. Some wines were sweet, others dry. Some flavored with herbs, honey, or even seawater. Yes, seawater, it acted as a preservative and added a distinctive taste. Aged wine was valued. Wine stored in sealed amphoras could last years, developing complexity. Like modern wine culture, connoisseurs could distinguish regions, vintages, qualities. Wine was culture, commerce, religion, all mixed together. Fact 92. Building processes. Constructing a temple was a massive civic project taking decades. Quarries would cut marble blocks, sometimes weighing several tons. These would be transported by sled, roller, or shipped to the building site. Blocks were lifted into place using cranes, pulleys, and lots of human labor. They'd be fitted together with incredible precision, no mortar, just precisely cut stones. Metal clamps held blocks together. Sculptures and decorative elements would be carved in place after construction, like painting a ceiling. It was easier to do it in position. The whole community would be involved: quarrying, transporting, building, decorating. A major temple was a generation's project, a statement of civic pride and religious devotion. Fact 93. Medical ethics. The Hippocratic tradition established ethical guidelines that still resonate. Do no harm. Maintain patient confidentiality. Don't take advantage of patients. Teach the next generation. Doctors saw themselves as serving patients, not profiting from suffering. This was a professional ethic, a way of elevating medical practice above mere trade. Of course, theory and practice didn't always match. Not all doctors followed these ideals. But the ideals themselves were revolutionary: medicine as an ethical calling, not just a job. Fact 94. Urban planning. When Greeks founded new colonies, they often used planned layouts. Hippodamus of Miletus pioneered grid-based city planning: streets at right angles, organized blocks, designated areas for different functions. The agora at the center, temples on prominent spots, residential areas radiating out. Walls for defense. Planned water systems, drainage. This was a new way of thinking about cities: not organic growth, but rational design. It reflected Greek ideals of order, proportion, rational planning. Many Roman cities later adopted this grid system. Modern city planning owes a debt to Greek innovations. Fact 95. Sleep beliefs. Greeks believed sleep was when the soul wandered. Hypnos, god of sleep, and Morpheus, god of dreams, would visit. Dreams were messages from gods, from the dead, from your own soul. Prophetic dreams were taken seriously. You'd visit dream interpreters who'd explain what your dreams meant. Some temples offered dream incubation. You'd sleep there hoping for a divine dream. The line between sleep and death was thin. Hypnos and Thanatos, sleep and death, were twin brothers in mythology. Sleep was a little death, death was an eternal sleep. Rest was sacred. Sleep was necessary for body and soul. They understood something we sometimes forget in our busy world. Fact 96. Children's education in Sparta. Spartan girls, unlike Athenian girls, received education and physical training. They'd learn athletics, dancing, music. The goal was to create healthy mothers who'd bear strong children. Spartan women were famously strong-willed and outspoken. They'd tell men heading to battle, "Come back with your shield or on it," meaning win or die, don't retreat. This education created a different kind of woman than in Athens, physically strong, educated, managing estates while men were at war, participating in public life. Different city-states had very different ideas about gender, education, society. The Greek world wasn't monolithic, it was diverse, varied, full of different approaches to living. Fact 97. Honey uses. Honey was the main sweetener. Sugar didn't exist in Greece yet. They used honey in cooking, in wine, as medicine, as an offering to gods. Honey was believed to have healing properties, and it actually does, with natural antimicrobial qualities. They'd use it on wounds, mix it into medicinal drinks, preserve fruit in it. Beekeeping was a skilled practice. Beekeepers understood bee behavior, knew how to collect honey without destroying the hive, recognized different honey qualities from different flowers. There's something sweet about honey being so central to their lives, this gift from nature, created by bees, golden and delicious and useful. Fact 98. Funeral games. After important funerals, especially for heroes and leaders, Greeks would hold funeral games. Athletic competitions, chariot races, contests in honor of the deceased. This combined mourning with celebration, honoring the dead through displays of excellence, strength, skill. The games would attract competitors from across the Greek world. The most famous funeral games were those Achilles held for Patroclus in the Iliad: chariot racing, boxing, wrestling, archery. Epic poetry describes them in detail. It was a way to process grief through action, through competition, through community gathering. The dead were honored, life continued. Fact 99. Language evolution. The Greek language itself evolved over the centuries. From Mycenaean Greek written in Linear B, to the various dialects Attic, Ionic, Doric, each region had its version. Athens dialect, Attic Greek, became dominant for literature and philosophy. When we read ancient Greek texts today, we're usually reading Attic Greek. The language was flexible, expressive, capable of abstract thought and poetic beauty. It could discuss philosophy, tell jokes, express emotions, record laws, all with precision and nuance. Many English words come from Greek: democracy, philosophy, theater, mathematics, politics, ethics. The language lives on in our vocabulary. Fact 100. The Greek legacy. Here's our final fact, and it's a big one. The Greeks gave us so much of what we consider civilization. Democracy, theater, the Olympics, philosophy, scientific method, historical writing, geometry, medicine, poetry, sculpture, architecture, all either invented or fundamentally shaped by the Greeks. But beyond specific inventions, they gave us a way of thinking, questioning assumptions, seeking truth through reason, valuing individual human excellence, believing that humans could understand the world and shape their own destiny. They weren't perfect, far from it. Their society had deep injustices, their wars were brutal, their treatment of many people was unjust by any standard. But they asked the big questions: how should we live? What is justice? What is beauty? What is truth? And they tried to answer them through reason, observation, and debate. That questioning spirit, that willingness to think deeply about human life and human society, that's perhaps their greatest gift to us. And that brings us to our last few facts, though honestly, by now, I hope you're already dreaming. The ancient Greeks believed that sleep was a gift from the gods, specifically Hypnos, the god of sleep. They thought that when you slept, you were entering another realm, a peaceful place where your mind could restore itself. And you know what? They were right. Sleep is restorative. It's healing. And whatever happened today, whatever's waiting for tomorrow, right now, in this moment, you get to just rest. We've wandered through 2,500 years of history together tonight, through markets and temples, symposiums and battlefields, ordinary homes and grand monuments. We've met philosophers and farmers, warriors and women, children playing with toys and elders sharing wisdom. The Greeks lived, loved, struggled, created, thought, questioned just like we do. They were fully human, in all the beautiful and complicated ways that means. Their civilization has long since passed, but echoes of it remain in our words, our ideas, our institutions, our art. They're still with us in a way, these people from so long ago. So I'll leave you here, in peace. The Greeks are still there in history, their stories preserved in stone and pottery and ancient texts. Their questions still echo across the centuries. And you get to drift wherever sleep takes you. Maybe you'll dream of marble temples in the sun, or olive groves on rocky hillsides, or the wine-dark sea. Maybe you'll dream of nothing at all. Either way, you're safe here. You're comfortable. You're exactly where you need to be. Sleep well. Rest deeply. Let the centuries fade away. Good night.